those of you who got an invite, welcome to Nerd Prom.
No matter where in the world you are, we're all Nerds International. With the hyphen. Nerds International proudly presents
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Veiled Fury Entertainment. I'm ManuFS. I'm going to be your host for tonight, and I have with me the absolutely most famous Eli Kurtz of the Mythic Gazetteer here to talk with me about the Blackwood setting, the Blackwood Kickstarter, and generally all things Eli and random shit. So, hello, Eli.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. It's good to be here. I'm excited to be on Twitch. I think this is my first time.
Wow. Nice. So, well, you're my first interview and Q&A, so first times all around. That's great.
Perfect.
So I'm going to start off with one announcement, since it's a bit of the Blackwood is a bit of a mix from all things all around the world. I'm going to start this evening with a whiskey from the Americas, bourbon, Elijah Craig, 12 years old, very nice, and I'm going to transition into a Lefroy Scotch.
Very nice. I'm just drinking water, unfortunately. Forgot to pick anything up.
All right, so at the moment, the Kickstarter is running really well as far as I can see it. We're at 146 backers, about $1,500 to go before we reach the actual goal, and then it's on to stretch goals. So it's running well, which I guess feels really nice.
Oh, it feels so good. I can't tell you how much I worried before we launched the Kickstarter. And, you know, they say with Kickstarter, if you want to be reasonably certain of success, you need to get to 30% funding in the first few days. And I think by the end of the first 48 hours, we were already at 50% funding. So it was nice to breathe a little easier after that. But no, it's been a really wild ride. It's been good.
Yeah, that I believe. I have the stats from KickTrack open at the moment, and you were, I think, 60% funded also after 2 days. So,
yeah, that's right.
Really off to a good start.
It was a good feeling. And yeah, as of today, we've finally hit the 70% mark. This is the central slump that happens in pretty much every Kickstarter campaign. But yeah, we're chugging right along. Still feeling pretty good about things.
Sweet. So we're going to come back to the Kickstarter and especially the stretch goals in a bit, but we're going to start off a bit focusing more about the man behind, or I should say the main man behind, since you are mostly the face of the campaign and the setting. So as I understand it, your heritage is a bit mixed, so you have some German in your heritage.
I do, yeah. Kurtz is a German name, and my grandma on my mom's side on my dad's side, sorry, she's traced our family back quite a ways, and most of my family on that side is pretty solid American, like we're related to Pocahontas and that sort of thing. But wow. We also have some family that came over from Germany, I think in the 1700s or something like that, 16 or 1700s, and she's traced her surname anyway back to the Alemanni tribe, like back in the Roman era. So yeah, she's traced it back pretty far.
Wow, that's a lot of history. Wow.
Yeah, it is, and I don't know that it's necessarily a direct line, but her surname is Allman, and it's related at least to that ancient tribe. So pretty cool stuff.
Nice. So how much of your heritage and you getting in touch with all your heritage and doing that research had a direct influence on the Blackwood?
Yeah, well, it had a pretty huge influence. The Blackwood, the name itself is pretty clearly an indicator. So it's Schwarzwald from Germany, of course. And it's, you know, the setting of a lot of Grimm's tales and that sort of thing. And so it started, as far as my research goes, it started whenever I moved to Chicago about 6 years ago. and I was leaving home, and I was feeling nostalgic about, my family back home and everything, and I was curious about my roots, both back in Missouri, my home state, and more ancient than that, like my family lineage. And so I was reading a lot of Grimm's Tales, like I said, and I noticed there was such a huge difference in tone between folklore and traditional fantasy, like Tolkien and all of the derivatives that have spawned from Tolkien, which is interesting because Tolkien actually, he was a folklorist himself. He wrote a pretty sweet essay called On Fairy Stories, and it has a lot of real good insight about what folklore is and how to tell it and why it's important and that sort of thing. And so all of that kind of came together, and I was like, oh yeah, well, I really want to make a setting that sort of explores my heritage like that. And it seemed like folklore was the way to do it and still be a little unique instead of just doing another fantasy setting that's got elves and dwarves and hobbits and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And that's something I think that Pinnacle is looking for in new licensees. They just want to have these same stories retold over and over and over again, but they want people who can put a very cool creative spin on new things. And from what I've seen from the Blackwood, yeah, it just hits all the marks in that category, which is really cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I knew if I was going to make a fantasy setting for Savage Worlds, Shinetar would be the gold standard. And I wanted to create something that I didn't think I could compete with it, to be honest. I mean, it's a great setting. And so I was like, what can I do that's similar but unique on its own? And the Blackwood is the result.
Cool. Yeah, the first I wouldn't have thought Shinetar the first thing. First thing that would have come to my mind would have been Hellfrost, which takes a lot of elves, dwarves, and halflings and stuff, but it puts its own unique spin on it and a kind of end of the world feeling in one end of the world with the Hellfrost and everything, but then also the kind of its own spin on Arabian Nights with Lands of Fire. So,
right.
Nice.
No, and I actually haven't had a chance to take a look at Hellfrost yet. I looked through Shinetar quite a bit before I started to make sure I wasn't going to do anything too similar. But Hellfrost is something that I know a lot about from hearing people talk about it, but haven't had a chance to look at it directly.
There's a lot of influence of Nordic sagas can be found in Hellfrost if you know how to look at it from the right angle.
Sure. Well, that's cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the topic of me drinking on my own show, what's your favorite drink?
Man, I am such a situational drinker. I love a good whiskey, and actually, the Elijah Craig 12 year is really good. So I'm a little jealous of you right now. But yeah, I love a good whiskey, particularly bourbon and Irish whiskey. Scotch, there's a lot of good Scotch out there, but I'm a little more partial to the Irish. And then I also love beer. I love wine, mostly red wines and mostly dark beers. But I'll drink pretty much anything. Tequila is maybe the one thing that I'm like, I'm usually good.
I can absolutely get on board with that. Okay, so you took something away. So yeah, Blackwood, and of course that was the first thing I saw when I saw your announcement about the setting. It's like, if that's influenced by the Black Forest or the Schwarzwald, as you've already said, and yeah, you already answered that. So that's pretty cool to see something from my own home country and country where I still live in pop up in a setting made by an American. That's something that's pretty awesome, because usually the only thing that gets exported from us is Nazis.
There's a lot more to Germany than just the Nazis. Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that I have heard, and I don't know that I've ever had this confirmed, but I think like cuckoo clocks are primarily from the Black Forest, right? Yeah, that's sort of where the tradition started.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So one part of the Blackwood that I have
a special part of ham, the Schwarzwälder Schinken or Black Forest ham.
Ah, okay, yeah, okay. Well, I need to put some more wild boars in the setting then, I guess, or some domesticated pigs or something.
Absolutely.
But yeah, one part of the setting that I haven't talked a lot about on other interviews is the Clockwork technology in the Blackwood. And it was inspired specifically by the tradition of cuckoo clocks and that sort of thing. I didn't want to do a true big and proud clockpunk vibe for the Blackwood. I wanted it to be a solid, straight fantasy or something like it anyway. But still, there are a lot of really complex clockwork locks that you'll find in the Blackwood. There's actually a class of person in the Blackwood called a clocksmith, and they are responsible for all sorts of clockwork creations, whether that's construction materials like a crane or a lift of some kind, or a lock or an actual clock. They do all sorts of stuff like that.
Nice, very interesting. So it's kind of, I'm guessing you're going to get comparison with steampunk settings because of that, but you sound rather confident that it's its own thing. There are many "it's" in that sentence.
Yeah, well, it's the clockwork technology in the Blackwood is definitely not the focus of the setting, but it is present. So. And actually, a setting that we're planning on developing in the future will be a true steampunk setting. So I hope I don't get too much comparisons to that right now. But so for an example, there's a character that you'll run into in the Blackwood who is a hunter who used to be a clocksmith. And she decided that she preferred the forest to the workshop. And so she went out and she learned the trade of hunting. But she still uses her clockwork technology. So she's got a net launcher gun that she carries around in addition to her crossbow. And it's just basically, a catapult on a stock. But it's still, that's the sort of stuff you're going to see as opposed to something like a clockwork robot or something.
Nice. Okay, we're going to come back to that on a later question. By the way, for the guys watching live on Twitch, I'm having half an eye on the Twitch chat. So if any questions pop up in your mind, just post them into the Twitch chat, and I'm going to try to work them in as best as I can. Okay, so let's go. Let's stay at the beginning, at the roots. You said it was kind of because of you wanted to get in touch with your heritage that spawned the whole idea for the Blackwood, but I'm guessing it was a little bit more like, oh, wow, some of my ancestors were German. In Germany, there's a big black forest. Let's make that a Savage World setting. So I'm guessing there was a bit more to that, and the process took a little bit longer before you decided to actually make it a Savage World setting.
Yeah, absolutely. So at first I had a setting that was an entire world, and it was just this, I was trying to capture a real mythic vibe in this original setting. And this is 6 years ago when I first started working on this. And then I was like, no, I want to focus on a single area. I wanted to do instead of the top-down world building, I kind of wanted to do the bottom-up. And so I was like, okay, well, Black Forest, Germany, that sounds awesome. Let's try this out and see what we can come up with. And so it was at first just a world where I was planning on writing stories. And then it turns out that even short fiction is really not my bag. I much prefer to create, a set of a toolbox that people can use to tell their own stories rather than guiding them on this one narrative track. And so I started developing it as a role-playing game, and I originally used an independent free RPG called Warrior, Rogue, and Mage, which is a really cool system. I guess I could describe it as the most bare-bones version of Savage Worlds possible. You just have the three attributes, Warrior, Rogue, and Mage, and you can put points into those, and then everything you do is in terms of one of those skills, right? And you also have magic powers that you can cast, but they're almost identical to the way powers are handled in Savage Worlds in terms of there's a generic effect, and then you can attach whatever description you want to on top of it. Mm-hmm. There was advancement, but it wasn't very robust, And as I was developing it, I was like, I really want to make this into a setting that I can hold in my hands. I want a book that I can create out of this. So I was looking at the different options for publishing, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to publish it with Warrior, Rogue, and Mage because that's a free product. It wouldn't be worth my time to create the book that was as pretty as I wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. So I started looking at other systems, and Savage Worlds immediately caught my eye because of its reputation as a pulp system, and I love pulp stories. But the more I found out about it,
I can hear Jared Gunning crying out in pain.
Oh yeah, the swear words are copious as soon as the word pulp passes somebody's lips. But the more I found out about it, the more I was like, this is exactly the system I'm looking for. It's a little crunchy without being too crunchy. It's not just a combat simulator. It's got a lot of great storytelling opportunities in it. It's got a really awesome licensee process. It's got a good community of licensees and of fans and consumers, I guess, too. And yeah, it was just perfect. And so that was maybe 2 years ago when I decided to do that. And then it was just a matter of converting everything over and, learning how to do art and layout, which is its own special nightmare. But
yeah,
it's been a really fun ride so far. Yeah. Oh, yeah, because you produced some supplements yourself. That's right.
Yeah, I have 2 one-sheets out, and I am kind of infamous for my Shadowrun conversion, which I usually don't advocate too much because of licensing problems that may arise. It's kind of a gray area. Like,
of course, yeah.
If they don't know, they won't sue me into oblivion. So, Catalyst Game Labs, I love your products. I have tons of Shadowrun books, so please leave me alone.
And depending on the Blackwood stretch goals, you might be publishing for us as well, right?
That is true. I am part of these stretch goals, which we will talk about later a bit. So,
sounds good.
The licensing process from Pinnacle. Did you have to make any, if any? Did you have to make adjustments to the setting, or did they just listen to your elevator pitch and be like, "Yeah, just sign with your blood on the dotted line, and we'll see you in a year"?
Yeah. Well, I think I worried a lot about the submission, and that helped me when it came time to actually making the submission. I had been working on the submission for probably about a year, making sure that I had something worthy to show them. And then I submitted back in February, and it was actually a really quick approval process afterward. It was I was kind of shocked at how quick it happened. But, I was bracing to submit and then wait a little while to hear back from them, and then hear that I would need to change something, and then I would pay that development fee and go through that whole rigmarole. But no, they liked it right off the bat, and they approved me right away, and it was really simple and painless.
Wow, that's great.
It was kind of shocking. Yeah,
I believe that's a really great feeling to send something in you've put so much work into already, and then the people whom it all depends on are like, wow, that's awesome. Yeah, we want you to make that for us. I can imagine that's a pretty great feeling, and that's something, I envy of you, definitely.
It really was. It was a good feeling, I'll admit it. And it's cool to think that it can be that simple for somebody to become a licensee. I mean, as long as you've got a cool idea and you can present it in an attractive way, you can make an official Savage Worlds product, and that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the general tone that I like about this community. It's rather easy to get into the community, and it's nice to see that it's apparently rather easy to get into the licensee side of that as well, which is nice to know. Right, so as I said I mentioned earlier in the beginning, you are kind of the face of the campaign, but you actually have some partners working with you. Your fiance, as you managed, and one more guy, Derek Smith.
That's right. Yeah. Derek is, he's technically the second in command. Keely, my fiance, she's around for, on the Kickstarter page, her title is The Realist, and it couldn't be more appropriate. She's the one, whenever we get too pie in the sky with our ideas, she's like, okay, so let's make this work. Let's keep our eye on the prize here. And that's been really helpful. But yeah, Derek, he's our legal counsel, and he is our lumberjack in chief, and he is writing a couple things for us too. We've got 4 free one-shot adventures out right now, and he wrote one of those, Tourist Season, kind of inspired by his time growing up in a lake town and seeing the yearly tourism boom every summer. and also inspired by one of Grimm's tales, the Elves and the Shoemaker, I think is the name of it.
Yeah, I read the one sheet, and that's pretty cool. And I thought it sounded familiar, but I didn't have time to do the research where it originally came from.
Yeah, and I got to give props to Derek, because this setting is mine. I came up with it and I wrote most of it, and I know that elves in the Blackwood are kind of bloodthirsty and kind of ruthless, but I had always been a little timid in terms of making that clear in the adventures. I was worried of going too far and making it like a gore fest or something. Mm-hmm. And so, like, a lot of my adventures, elves do weird stuff, but they're not necessarily like evil or dangerous or something, or just sadistic. And then Derek comes along and he writes this adventure, and it's got like an elf who flays the skin off of people and makes shoes out of them. And I was like, oh man, that's crazy. And I was like, I was scared to go there, but you did it so well. It was awesome.
I'm hoping that I get to run it, and I hope I get to run it with somebody who's in chat actually. Hi, Gary.
Hey, Gary.
Gary from the Wild Eye podcast, and he hates elves. So a setting where the elves are evil and you actually get to smack them and everybody loves you for it, that's probably going to be right up his alley.
Absolutely.
So when we are now that we are on that topic, so let's talk a bit about the elves in general. You said they are not necessarily evil, but then there's the whole thing of one elf flaying the skin of people. So elves, is that kind of a catch-all term you're using for evils, for the evil, or not really evil, or the spirits, the mischievous spirits in the Blackwood?
Yeah, so elves in like the historical record of folklore, what I am calling elves in the Blackwood would probably best be described as fairies or fae or something, right? But because I was trying to create a distinctly Germanic setting, I didn't want to use the term fairy because that has an etymology in English and in French. Mm-hmm. An elf is in pretty much every Germanic language. It refers to the same type of being, but because of Tolkien and because of all these other subsequent things, we have a very particular image of what an elf is, right? So that was one of the big challenges with the Blackwood, was how do I call these things elves but make it clear that they are not your typical elves? And so I'm inspired by things like Rumpelstiltskin. I'm inspired by these creatures, the fair folk. You call them nice and you call them pretty and you call them kind, because if you're not extremely complimentary to them, they're going to drop you into a stew pot and eat you for dinner. And I was also inspired by stuff like Twin Peaks. I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but they've got their white and black lodges, and they've got these kind of spiritual beings who are just alien. They're just weird. They do, like in Twin Peaks, the effect that they have, they perform a scene backwards and then they reverse the tape and play it back forwards, so that everybody's movements are really disjointed, and like their voices are weird too because it's actually speaking in reverse that's been reversed. Anyway, I'm digressing. The point is, elves are really not human. They're very different from humans, and I call them evil, but really it's just that they're totally beyond human understanding. It's blue and orange morality. It's just not really expressible in human terms. And yet humans are trying to live in this forest that the elves call home, and elves don't like it. And so there's going to be conflict there. They've got to find a way to survive, despite the fact that the elves are always trying to push the wilderness into humanity's domain and snuff humanity out.
Yeah, I think that's a point that gets brought across really well by the one sheet tourist season. And Gary says in chat, well, if you live to be 1,000 years old, you'd flay the skin of someone just to make shoes at least one time.
Yeah, I mean, you exhaust all your other options for creativity at a certain point, right? You get bored.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was something that I really liked about Tourist Season, because it just drives that point home that elves are something beyond human understanding. They live in the same world, and technically the same kind of laws of nature apply to them, but also that not all the time, and you can never be quite sure in what kind of situation you're going to be in, like if gravity is going to work if you stray off the known path or not, and if the colors are all going to be the same, or if the strawberry is going to taste like a strawberry, if it's actually a transformed bear that's going to transform back once you've swallowed it. It's
You're giving me a lot of ideas for adventures here, Manuel. This is good stuff.
If you guys see it in a one sheet, you've heard it here first. Wild Fury Entertainment. Cool. So playtesting. You said you did playtesting. You did a whole campaign for about a year to playtest.
Yeah. That's on my YouTube channel, and it's a bunch of guys that I've gamed with throughout high school and college and afterward. And it accomplished two things. First of all, it helped me to master the Savage Worlds rule set. And second of all, it helped me to understand how the Blackwood fits into that rule set, right? By the time we started playtesting, I had a very clear idea of what the Blackwood was supposed to be, but I wanted to find more ways, like setting rules specifically, edges and hindrances and that sort of thing, to really marry the Blackwood to the mechanics of Savage Worlds. And so some of the things that we developed as a course of the playtesting was like the Elven Wild setting rule that I have, which is basically a hack of a dramatic task, but you're navigating this slippery, magical wilderness terrain where one moment you could be on walking through the branches of a giant tree grove, and it's a dizzying height, and you keep like almost losing your balance and falling, and then all of a sudden you are in this gigantic burned out area that's filled with choking ash and that sort of thing. And that was something that we developed about halfway through the playtest campaign, because one of our players, Jeremy, his character had an old elven fling who had come back to haunt him, and they had to hunt her down and take her out, and they had to travel through the wilderness to get there. So that's how that mechanic came to be.
Right. I had a look at the mechanic in the early access playtest document, and it's a really cool mechanic, and I'm totally going to steal that at one point for, I guess, space in a sci-fi campaign where the uncharted space, or maybe sometimes even the charted space, is a really dangerous place to go. And mechanic you developed from the dramatic task gave me a lot of great ideas. So that's a really original and great spin on a dramatic task.
Yeah, well, I could see that. I could see the mechanic being hacked for something like in 2001: A Space Odyssey, whenever he goes through hyperspace and it's that trippy LSD scene for a little while. I could see that being the type of weirdness you could capture in a space setting with this mechanic. So there's ripe ground there.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you only GM in I guess in the campaign you GM, but did you also have the opportunity to playtest as a player at the table for the Blackwood, or were you just always in the GM seat?
I've had two opportunities to play at this point. I've run probably close to 20 games, 20 or 25, maybe even 30 at this point. But I was a player in the Wild Die podcast's one-shot, which Eric had written, The Flying Canoe.
Yeah.
And that was a ton of fun. And then I also played in a playtest for Derek's Tourist Season one-shot. And the first time when I was in Eric's campaign, I played Celebrant Marion, who's a character from the Wildlands. He's kind of a priest type, but he's also a breakdancer. It's pretty cool. And then for Derek's one shot, I played Many Quills, who's a pagan, and I never quite knew how I wanted to handle pagans as a player until I got the chance to play this guy, and he turned into the most ridiculous country bumpkin you've ever seen in your life. Like it It was a lot of fun to play him. He was this guy, and he didn't know it. He didn't know Jack from a boot, but oh boy, he knew the wilderness like nothing else.
Oh my god, that accent is hilarious. That is awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, but no, I've been really grateful for both chances to play that I've had so far, and I'm hoping that once the book gets out, some of my friends will want to maybe run a campaign, and I would maybe be able to play in it then too. That'd be pretty awesome.
So basically, if I want to circumvent one of the higher tiers, all I have to promise is to run a campaign, and then you will just play in it, and I can bounce ideas off of you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would love to do that.
Well, I can't promise a campaign, but awesome. Maybe a one-shot or a short adventure, I guess we can do that. So yeah,
absolutely.
Speaking of characters, so what are typical archetype characters people can play in the Blackwood?
Yeah, so there are probably 3 core classic archetypes in the Blackwood, and they're tied to this idea of warriors and magic users and sneaky types, right? So the Blackwood expression of that, the sneaky type would be a hunter, and it's a person who has a really vital role in their community. They're the ones so every community is protected by this magic hedge, which is really tall and thick and thorny, and it's cultivated by a village's ancestors and that sort of thing. And inside the hedge, you're safe, but inside the hedge, you don't have everything you need to survive. So these hunters go out into the forest, and they hunt down game, they forage for herbs and things like that, and they also have to deal with all of the trickiness of the wilderness while they're out there. And so, one of the edges you can take is a Trapper Edge, and it basically allows you to emulate a power effect like Bolt or Blast or Confusion or something like that. And it's a non-magical expression of that sort of thing, but you set it and then you try to lure somebody into it and that sort of thing. The warrior, the classic warrior archetype for the Blackwood, would be the Sentinels. And the Sentinels are I almost think of them as like Jedi Knights or something. They're errant. They roam around the Blackwood. They have the authority of law on their side, and they wear shining armor. They've got the classic weapon for Sentinels is a falchion and a buckler, because I was inspired a lot by HEMA as I was developing the fighting styles for the Blackwood, historical European martial arts, and falchion and buckler is one of the classic styles in HEMA. And so I was like, oh yeah, it'd be really cool if we had a group of people who used this. Although, of course, you can use whatever weapon you want as a Sentinel. But yeah, so they have the authority to pass judgment upon people in the Blackwood, and they have shiny armor that they wear as a result of being a Sentinel. It's actually part of the Sentinel Edge. And they're the most classic warrior archetype. And then the magic users would be classicists. They are people who study the 5 classics of lore and reason, which is the collected wisdom of the Elder King. And they are inspired by illuminated manuscripts from the Middle Ages. I actually had the opportunity to go to Ireland once upon a time, and I got to see the Book of Kells face to face, so to speak. Yeah, and it was just amazing to see the quality of art that happened so many centuries ago and has been preserved in such pristine quality this entire time. And I was like, man, that stuff, I can't imagine a person from the Middle Ages looking at the Book of Kells and thinking, oh no, this isn't magic. This is just a normal book. It had to be something that inspired awe in people. And so I was like, okay, so the classicists are people who illuminate books, and they do it so well that they can coax magic from the words that they write on the page because it's just so gorgeously illuminated. And so that's sort of their whole shtick. They also have a musical component to their thing too. So one of the pre-generated characters you can play as, Sister Garnet, she has a lap fiddle, and she can do. Have you ever seen Kung Fu Hustle?
Oh, way too long ago. I barely remember anything.
Well, there's the scene where these 2 assassins show up basically, and they've got this huge instrument that they lay across both their laps, and it's this stringed instrument. And by strumming on the strings, they can shoot these magic ghost sword things at people. Cool. And I love that image. It's like it's a super cool magic thing, and it's a super cool kung fu wuxia thing too. And so I had to have it in the Blackwood. So this pre-generated character can do the same thing. It's called a cutting cord.
Nice.
Yeah, but those are probably the big 3 archetypes that you can have. The Sentinel Warrior, the Classicist Mage, and then the Hunter, Crafty Devil type. But there are other things you can do too. There's a lot of room for pretty much anything. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's the Clocksmith. There are religious folks from outside the Blackwood who are kind of a cleric archetype. And so there's a lot of room for pretty much anything somebody wants to do, just like in any other fantasy setting in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said traps would work like kind of like trappings for certain powers, like bolt or ensnare or something. So is the trapper edge? Is it actually a arcane background?
No, that's one of the things. So one of the earliest goals I had for the Blackwood was that I didn't want the magic to be flashy, you know? I didn't want people like with glowing hands casting fireballs necessarily. I wanted it to be more like Kung Fu Hustle, where you just barely see this magical ghost blade that's striking out at somebody. And so I also wanted to find ways where you could access magical things without actually doing magic, right? Mm-hmm. And so the Trapper Edge is like you construct a mechanical trap of some kind, but it emulates a magical effect as per the powers in the Savage Worlds core rules. Another example, there's an edge called Magical Trinkets. And in order to do that, in order to qualify for that edge, you have to be lucky already. But once you do that, you have a number of these things that you can use to do magical effects. So like maybe you've got a comb in your bag, and if you take this comb out and you throw it over your shoulder, it turns into a giant hedge that stops people who are chasing you. Or like maybe you have a blade of grass and you can use it to whistle, and when it whistles, it'll alert people miles and miles away or something like that, you know. And so there's a lot of this, it's not necessarily a low magic setting, but it's a subtle magic setting, you know?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, no, I was about to say Gandalf, but Gandalf is a really bad example. He never throws a single fireball. He's not too bad. Gandalf is, in a lot of ways, the sort of magic you would see in the Blackwood, because he's always laboring over the magic he creates, and it's always difficult, and it's never as flashy as you would see in, like, Dungeons and Dragons or something, you know? It's more about an understanding of the world than it is, like, a super flashy mastery of the world, I guess you could say. Yeah, and so basically the wizards in the Blackwood are actually, if push comes to shove, they're not going to throw fireballs, they're just going to draw a blade and stand shoulder to shoulder with their knight brethren.
Exactly.
Yeah, not like Jeremy Irons in the absolutely horrible but nevertheless really funny Dungeons and Dragons movie would have been my negative example. And in one scene he uses fireballs to release 2 levers. That's
the movie. That's the movie that I saw a long time ago and can barely remember. But I do remember it was both terrible and amazing at the same time, like you said.
It's so horrible that it's absolutely hilarious. Again, I would absolutely recommend you get a bottle of Elijah Craig and just rewatch it.
Deal.
The whiskey helps. So we got one question from the chat. What was your inspiration for the Blackwood logo?
Oh, the Blackwood logo, yeah. I mean, the Blackwood logo is everywhere at this point. If somebody's watching this video, I'm sure they've seen it somewhere. I wanted to do, it's basically an example of illuminated script, you know, that first B is created from trees and vines, and then it spreads and kind of infects the rest of the lettering, which is otherwise, you know, your typical medieval black letter font. And so that's kind of the Blackwood in a nutshell. It's a typical medieval world, but it's infused with this kind of insidious natural magic that infects the entirety of the whole thing, even though it's kind of otherwise a mundane world.
Yeah, so it's kind of more penetration than infection, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, a little bit of both, I suppose you could say. Which talk about innuendos.
Wow. Well, even more questions coming back to the characters, which you kind of answered this in the Savage Worlds GM podcast, which I recommend you guys see if you want to hear more about other things I'm not going to ask here. It was a really great episode about the Blackwood. Are there Oriental dudes in the Blackwood?
Yeah, that's something that I've... so personally, I like diversity and I like representation. And so I want there to be room for the aforementioned Oriental dudes. And you can see that a little bit in the art that I've created for the free pre-generated characters, right? You've got the one guy, Celebrant Marion, who's from the Widelands, and he's a black guy. And the Widelands are basically the rest of the world. People in the Blackwood are so cut off from the rest of the world that to them, everything that's not the Blackwood is just the Widelands. But really, that's like plains, that's mountains, that's deserts, that's other forests, that's tropical island chains and things like that. There's all sorts of stuff that you can find. So if you want to have a character who is not your typical Germanic white guy, the Widelands is the first place you could look to find that. But even then, the hunter character that I have, Owl Guntram, in the pre-generated characters, the guy who drew him, the artist is Eric Quigley, and he's great to work with. I highly recommend him for anything. I think he's worked with a few Savage Worlds folks before. But whenever he made this character, he actually used Danny Trejo as an inspiration. And so he's got this kind of Hispanic looking vibe to him, and it's just perfect. Like, I love it to death. And so I think, yeah, even in the Blackwood itself, you've got people who aren't your typical Germanic white people. You've got Woodkin, who are maybe a little Hispanic or some other kind of ethnicity that's non-white. You've also got pagans who anybody can be a pagan, but I think ethnic pagans are probably they would be somewhere between. Oh yeah, no, because Many Quills. Whenever Eric drew Many Quills, I think he was inspired by Jackie Chan for that guy. So that's an Asian example right there too. So short answer, yeah, there are all kinds of ethnicities in the Blackwood. You can do whatever you want,
Yeah,
and I encourage you to do it.
Yeah, because as you said before, the Blackwood is inspired by tales and folklore from around the world, and not just from the Americas or from Germany.
Exactly. Yeah. The main inspirations are Germany, early colonial America, and China. But I mean, like I said, the next setting we're going to explore is a steampunk setting, and it's in the same world. And so I want to explore the folklore of other cultures with these subsequent settings as well.
Nice. So we could have some kind of Shanghai Noon remake when the Blackwood meets your new setting.
That is absolutely going to happen. Yes.
Sweet.
There's going to be some Blackwood princess who gets kidnapped, and we're going to have some dudes have to go off to the Widelands and rescue her. That's going to happen.
Danny Trejo and Jackie Chan are going to travel to a steampunk world. Oh my god, I can't wait for that.
I would watch that movie.
I would watch the living daylights out of that movie. Right, so coming back to characters, technically we never really left characters, but magic. Is there something you developed on the magic side that just didn't make the cut and just got removed?
Yeah, so what can I talk about there? So we've got 5 arcane backgrounds, and that number has fluctuated over time. One example, there's an arcane background, herbalism, which is all about making potions and that sort of thing. And I went back and forth trying to create my own mechanics for it for a long time, and then I realized the alchemy arcane background from the Fantasy Companion is exactly what I'm looking for. So that's one example of one that draws specifically from already published Savage Worlds material. But then, I've got stuff that's pretty weird too, like ancestor worship is another arcane background, and that works out similarly to like the superheroes arcane background or the superpowers arcane background. But it's also a PowerPointless Arcane background. So you've got some Arcane backgrounds that use PowerPoints, some that don't. You've got some that are original mechanics. You've got some that are drawn from other Savage Worlds books, and that sort of thing.
Cool. So are you using PowerPoints or the no PowerPoints option, or mix of both?
Yeah, that's the Ancestor Worship Arcane background is the one that has no PowerPoints, but the rest of them do operate on PowerPoints, every one of them. Yeah, and one Arcane background that I haven't mentioned so far is the Elven magic. If you want to be a pagan, you just take Arcane background Elven Pact, and then you make a deal with an elf to give you power in exchange for basically being this elf's occasional servant. And you can either choose to do it by having a totem, like a carved piece of wood or stone or bone or something that you use as a reminder or a focus for the elven power, or you make an oath for the elf, and it's something like, from dusk till dawn you will remain under a roof, or anytime you spill salt you'll throw it over your left shoulder, or something like that. And as long as you obey the oath, the elf doesn't bother you and you can use the power. But if you ever break the oath, like if you spill salt and you throw it over your right shoulder instead, that elf is going to show up and it's going to wonder why you broke the rules, and it's going to maybe exact a punishment from you as a result.
That's a really interesting approach to that, and I can see that. I see that as very gameable, because you make a pact so the elf gets something out of it, and it may something be absolutely a little small thing, just like you said. If you kick over a salt shaker, you just have to pick up some of the salt and throw it over your left shoulder. But that has to mean something to the elf, and maybe that means that does something nobody knows it does, and it has consequences along the way. And once the character reaches heroic, maybe they stumble across a piece of lore where totally by random accident they just read about, and if you do this and this for an amount of times over such and such, then X happens. And one guy in the group is like, oh shit.
What have I done? Yeah, well, and in terms of the game mechanics, the Elven Pact background, if you choose to take an oath, really you just make a vow, and if you break that vow, then you get an enemy hindrance, and the enemy shows up and wonders what's going on. And then you resolve that situation, and you're back, and you have that vow hindrance again, and if you break it again, then the enemy shows up again. And so that one, it's a novel way to approach an arcane background, but it only uses the tools from the core Savage Worlds book, right? Mm-hmm.
Very nice, yeah, very, very elegant, and a very approach I approve of very much. It's to not introduce too much unnecessary stuff if you can just do it with the core rules. So that's really exactly. Great, really elegant solution. So talking about the elves, your inspiration for bad guys in general was a lot of it came from Grimm's tales, but the Brothers Grimm, they just retold a lot of actually existing tales, and they put a bit of a more positive spin on it. So did you research the actual tales too? Because, for example, in the original version of The Little Mermaid, she doesn't get the prince. The prince hits it off with her, but if I remember correctly, he just dumps her for some other princess, and the Little Mermaid is so sad she tries to drown herself, and then she becomes the foam on top of cresting waves. That's actually how the foam came into existence, according to that tale. And the Brothers Grimm took that tale and they just put a way more positive spin on it.
Yeah, well, and the original Cinderella, in order to fit in the glass slipper, the stepsisters were cutting off their toes and cutting off their heels to try and get in there, and that's gory stuff. Yeah, that's desperation. That's dark, And so, yeah, I definitely was inspired by the original folk tales, or as original as I could find them. And there's no shortage of really dark stuff that goes on in the early Grimm's tales, and really from any culture. It's kind of surprising how unforgiving they can be. And beyond just, elves being the bad guys, because you had asked, what the inspiration was for bad dudes in the Blackwood. Another thing that was a huge inspiration was, like I've mentioned in other places, Kung Fu and Wuxia is a huge influence on the setting as well. And Wuxia, the whole genre, hinges on this idea of the Jianghu, which is this martial underworld, right? And the idea is that government, for whatever reason, is either corrupt or ineffectual, and it just can't work to the benefit of people. And so you've got these people who are outlawed, or these people who are ostracized by society or whatever, and for whatever reason they've decided that they're going to do something about it. And so they either prey on people who need help, or they help those people out. And it is this system where they are using violence to fight against corrupt power. And by fighting against that corrupt power, they gain power themselves. But because they used violence to get it, that power it corrupts them. And so it's this endless cycle where they're like, ooh, there's corrupt power. We have to use violence to solve it. And then they solve it and they become the ones in power, but then they become corrupt and somebody else has to come along and do that too. So it's this cyclical kind of crapsack world where the kingdom is falling apart and the nobility is forgetting its duties to the people. And these people that you play as, errants, they have to go out and they have to try and make the world work. It's sort of all on their shoulders because everybody else is turning their backs on it. And that's inspired by Wuxia, and I wish this wasn't the case, but there's also plenty of inspiration in real life right now too. So
yeah, true. Very true.
It's too bad. But it's fun because I like creating stories that make people confront issues that are either in their life or in the world or whatever. And I don't want to force people to do that, because if people want to just get together and drink beer and eat pretzels and roll some dice, I love that kind of game. But I want there to be an opportunity for those more challenging stories too. So like another one of the one-shots that I have created, it's called Leaf, Stone, and Silk. And that one is roughly inspired by the Boston Tea Party, but it's also inspired by my experience attending some protests over the past few months and looking at all the different groups of people who come together for these events and wondering, what would happen if one of the other groups was in charge of this protest? Like, what if instead of it being organized by a bunch of student workers, it was being organized by like the witches that I saw walking through a crowd and scrubbing the crowd with by burning sage or something. Like, it would be such a different experience if they had taken control of that. And so in this adventure, there's a mob, and you get to decide, or you get to try and influence the mob to be led by one of two different groups. And yeah, I mean, like I said, it's mostly the Boston Tea Party, but that element of you can decide who's in charge is definitely inspired by my real life experiences too.
Yeah, I've read it, and it's really it's a rather gray and a bit grim story. So because there's from a morality viewpoint, there's not really a winner. There's just people who are less wrong.
Yeah. Well, and the cool thing about it is that the two perspectives specifically are perspectives that a lot of my friends hold for themselves, and they don't agree with each other because they're different perspectives. Yeah. And it's there really isn't necessarily a right one. There's whichever one you think is going to be better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that can be a tough choice sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. What was I going to ask? Great, yeah. Okay, well, 55 minutes in and I've lost my train of thoughts for the first time. That's okay, I guess.
That's a decent record. Yeah,
that's absolutely okay. So yeah, what I was going to say is, it's a lot more. So if you wanted to play it like Robin Hood, you absolutely could, but the overall tone you are going for is pretty much more Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where even at the end, when everything is resolved, it's not really that much of a happy end. It's just an end and the beginning of something new.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil too much about the Plot Point campaign, but even at the end of the Plot Point campaign, it's like, oh, you have accomplished something really huge. but it's clear that the work is not done. And maybe even by saving the world, you've created a couple other problems, and you can choose to try and solve those problems on your own with your own adventures later on, or you can just choose to live in this changed world and make the most of it.
And that sounds like a really interesting way to end a plot point campaign. And I think that is something I would rather play than a plot point campaign that ends on the notion of "and they lived happily ever after." Happily ever after? No. Yeah, with all the cake from the celebrations. No, and they lived happily ever after. And there's not much to do afterwards except for, clean the plates and go to bed early.
Right. No, my philosophy for a long time about writing adventures and creating settings has been that as a world builder, it's not my responsibility to create all these stories that come to an ending. The gamers are the ones who will find the ending of the story. It's my job to stack as many crates of dynamite as precariously as possible everywhere, and then let the players try and tiptoe through them or blow them up as they want to, and then deal with the consequences. So what you told me, makes me really look forward to the plot point campaign. Very nice. So good.
We are running close to 1 hour, so I'm going to skip one question, and we are just going to stretch goals. We all know what's already in the stretch goals. So one of these stretch goals is a character sheet. By somebody
designed by Carl Kiesler.
Yeah,
pretty excited about that.
Famous for many, many things, including character sheets. So I'm very excited for that. And another stretch goal is also something I'm part of. It's going to be a kind of, what are you going to call it? A story compendium?
Right now, it's called the Book of Tales, and I might change that. I don't know. It's a working draft title for sure, but it's going to be a collection of one-shots and actual Blackwood-specific folklore. And so I've got, I think, 7 guest writers who are coming on. You're one of them. Eric Lamoureux is another one. Richard Woolcock is another one. And some of the writers are actual game designers. And in that case, I want them to come up with a one-shot adventure that could be played by a group of players. And then 2 or 3 of the writers are fiction writers. And I told them I want to create some folklore that can add to the flavor of the world and kind of explore core elements of the world, but could also be adapted into a one-sheet by intrepid GMs out there.
So basically it's more like a plot hook that comes in the form of a short story.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like it's going to be real onerous to read. Even the folklore is only going to be 1,200 words or less. But we commissioned one already ahead of time from a writer here in Chicago. Her name's Allie Grauer. And she wrote this awesome story about these 2 kids who follow their stepdad into the forest because he lives in a fishing village, but he's a hunter. And he's so tired of fishing, so he's like, "I'm going to go hunt in the forest." And they're like, "He doesn't know this forest. We can't let him do that." And so they follow him afterward, and they help him get out of trouble with an elf. And it's cool for a lot of reasons. I mean, first of all, the adventure writes itself. All you have to do is plug in the mechanics, and you're good to go. But second of all, it shows an atypical adventuring party too. It's an old stepdad and his 2 stepchildren. And you don't see the elderly hindrance or the young hindrance used very often in Savage Worlds, but True. This is a perfect example of how it could work out.
Yeah, absolutely, and it has a very fairy tale ring to it.
Absolutely,
with kids being with children being the actual heroes of the story.
Exactly, and that's the sort of thing that a one shot can't really accomplish. You can't presume to know who the player characters are going to be. You can only create the situation they find themselves in. Whereas with a folktale, you can say the protagonists of this story are X, Y, and Z, and it helps to spread the horizon of possibilities for people when they're making their characters.
Yeah, when you present it as a story, then the GM has one possible way it could go, and then he presents the same scenario to his players, and they are probably going to fuck it up all horribly and probably die twice, and it's going to go in a completely different direction.
Isn't that the way of it?
Absolutely. So, did you have a special process for selecting your guest writers, or did you just go with people you knew and heard about?
Well, it was a little bit of that. There were people that I knew I wanted to work with. You were one of them, actually. So, congratulations.
Thank you. Wow.
But something I also wanted to do in this project, this is my first publishing project. This is going to be my first book that I've published. You know, I'm brand new at this thing, and I've got the chops to do it. And I know a lot of other people out there are good writers. They just haven't really had the opportunity to be published in an official book like this. And I wanted to offer that opportunity to them too, because we're all in this together, you know. we're all trying to get our stuff published, and I want to help people do that as much as I can. So those were like the two main ingredients: people that I wanted to work with and people that I wanted to help out in their writing careers.
Cool. Thank you. That's very altruistic of you, and something we could use a little more, I think. Just people trying to help people.
Yeah, I'm doing my part, you know.
So, on behalf of everybody who gets a chance because of you, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And you know, that's the $7,000 stretch goal. I think we can make it to it, but it's going to take a lot more pledges between now and then. So, everybody get out there and back the Kickstarter.
Absolutely. KickTrack says you guys are tending towards a $10,000 turnout for the Kickstarter.
Man, that would be awesome.
Oh, geez. We've got stretch goals planned out to $15,000, but on the Kickstarter page, we've only got them listed to $11,000. But yeah, no, that'd be super cool. I'm on board. Let's do it.
Nice. So, because as far as I understand it, the more money, the prettier it's going to be. There's going to be a lot more, and I think art in color more color than black and white.
That's exactly right. The base funding goal, $5,000, will create a black and white book that has a lot of custom art, but it also has some stock art in there as well. Whereas, like, if we were to unlock the final stretch goal and get to $15,000, actually, by the time we get to $9,000, it becomes partial color, which means that the book itself will be color, some of the art will be color, some of it will be grayscale. And then I think by the time we get to 10,000, we are at a place where we no longer need any stock art, and all of the stuff will be full color at that point. So, yeah, the more we unlock in terms of stretch goals, the prettier the book's going to end up being.
Nice. So you heard it, guys. $10,000 are trending. I'm counting on all of you to make it 15,000. I want that book in pretty colors on my desk.
Yeah. Me too. And I want it by Monday morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Because my pledge level is for a physical book, actually, which is something I seldomly do. But a book that is based on fairy tales, I just couldn't say no. That's I got to have that as a physical book.
Totally. Well, thanks for your support, man.
Absolutely. And I think one of the higher tiers is still up for grabs. One of the $250 pledges is still open.
That's right. So the higher tier backer levels, there are 3 of them that are pretty cool. One of them is where you get to create an NPC for the setting. One of them is where you get to create an NPC and a village. And that one's especially cool because what I'm going to do after you create the village, I'm going to roll randomly and determine whether it's a village that stands or whether it's a ruin. And you actually have to go back and recover the village before you can do anything in it. And then the highest backer level is the noble tier. It's $250. And if you do that, you get to create an NPC, you get to create a location, and I'll run an online game for you. And right now, there's only one of those left. My parents took the first one. I was pretty excited about that. They've never played role-playing games before, so this will be like their first experience with it, which is pretty exciting. But because it's my parents, I think I might open it up and let somebody else have that one too if they want. So, yeah, and the same is true for the other two backer levels too. Those are all taken up right now, but I do plan to to open those up if there's enough interest, and maybe let a few more people in at that level.
So you guys heard it. If you want in on those pledge levels that are already taken and are filled up, just drop Eli a message, and if enough of you do, maybe you're going to get lucky.
That's exactly right. Yeah, let me know about it if you want it.
Sweet. So that's about all the time we have for tonight. Eli, thank you so much for coming on. This was absolutely great and very enlightening, and I'm even more stoked now, even more hyped for getting the Blackwood.
Yeah, man, it was great talking to you. It was a good time being on here.
Thank you. So guys, if you want to find out more great shows like this one, you can find me and many others on the Nerds International network. Find us on our Google Plus page. Links to everything will be provided in the comments once this show goes on YouTube. And as a very special plug for today, I would plug John Polak from the Nerds International Network. On his channel, you can find many interesting reviews and general RPG talk. And he did a review about the English version, about the most iconic German role-playing game there is. It's called The Dark Eye, or Das Schwarze Auge in German. And he did a review about the core rulebook, which is available in English, and the GM screens. So check him out. You can find him on YouTube on youtube.com/user/Gideon. That's GIDDOEN.
Cool.
Right. So I think that's about it. I wish you all a very great day, evening, night, morning, whatever your local time zone is, or whenever you're going to watch this once it goes up on YouTube. Eli, thank you very much for coming. And to all of you, I say, keep on gaming and stay savage. Bye-bye.
Yeah. See you, everybody.